a few years ago, we were looking at trying to determine what the insect populations were in our vineyard. And we finally realized we had no idea how to do that. So we live pretty close to Santa Cruz, and there's an entomology program at Santa Cruz. And so we thought, well, if we can find a PhD entomologist, he or she is working at a restaurant as a waiter, a dishwasher, and we can give them a fun project to work on. So we brought in, found a guy, basically that was his almost exact situation. He had just finished his PhD, and we told him what we wanted. But we weren't just interested in what was happening in our vineyard, we were interested in what was happening in the neighboring vineyard, where they had similar varieties and a similar landscape, a landscape being one in which there's ranged land around the outside perimeter of the vineyards, which is primarily annual grasses. And so we wanted kind of the same conditions as we were dealing with to make a fair comparison. And we had no idea what we would find. But so when you see these charts, you'll see the conventional and Piscinus. And what we're looking at on this first one is overall insect abundance. Part of the reason we're inspired by this is because of the work of Jonathan Lundgren and Ecdysis Foundation. If you guys are not familiar with him, he's doing a project called 1,000 Farms Initiative, in which he's comparing basically regenerative farms to a conventional farm all over the country, and he's working now in Canada, and I think he's about to go into Mexico too. And what he's doing is this comparative research, looking at what is actually occurring both ecologically and economically and socially on all of these farms. And it's a fantastic research project, and if you ever get a chance, go to their website. It's Ecdysis, ECDYSINS. Our food asher farm, yes, thank you. Anyway, so we do have a little bit of this work that's been done in the vineyard because one of his graduate students did a research study on almonds in California, doing this exact thing, comparing conventional to regenerative. And he just finished his PhD on vineyards in California, comparing regenerative that are doing extended season grazing to those that are doing maybe just season-long grazing and conventional vineyards. So we're about to get the research out to that. But this is an early little test that we did to see what was going on. One of the things that Jonathan told me when he was out visiting the vineyard one time, he said, "Hey, what's the most important thing in your opinion?" And I should have known because he's a PhD anthropologist. What's the most important thing to look for to determine ecosystem health? If we just had to look at one thing, and he said insect populations. Because if you don't have insects, then you're in trouble. So again, we did not really know how to do that at a level that we probably needed to. So we hired this guy, and these are the results. And so the initial thing is just the overall insect abundance. You can see is pretty dramatic. We had a lot more bugs in the vineyard. By the way, I said, what's the simple way for a grower to monitor for a healthy insect population? And he said, that one is very easy. You just look for spiders. And spiders are easy to find because most of them have webs. And so it's a great thing to go out early in the morning and see the dew on the spider webs that we have in our vineyard. In fact, we have so many spiders that we had a little bit of an issue with our irrigation system. So we used drip irrigation, and our emitters were clogging up, and we could not figure out what was going on. And I thought I was going to have to break down and run copper through the system. And we were just never able to pinpoint what the problem was. And finally, a guy from the drip irrigation company came out, and he said he took a couple of emitters, and he said, I'm going to do an autopsy on them. And he cut them open, put them under a microscope, and sent me the pictures. And he said, your emitters are full of spider parts, spider eggs, and dead spiders. And I said, that is amazing, fantastic news. And he said, why? I said, well, wait a minute. First, before I say that, is there anything we can do about that? He said, yeah, we have insect caps that you can put on there, and it'll keep stuff from went inside there. I said, okay, this is really great news because then I told that story about insects being a good indicator, spiders being a good indicator. The problem is that we have, what do we have? Probably 30,000 emitters. They sell these in packages of 20. So we spend all of our time cutting open the packages and getting 20 emitters out at a time. But anyway, so that's so we had it. We already had a sense that maybe we had a pretty good insect population. If I'm going to go through just a couple slides real quick here on this, he divided it out. So that first slide was just overall insect populations. He divided it out, and you can see the Piscinus branches in green, and then the control site, the conventional vineyard, is in red. And you can see that we were much higher in the parasitoids because those actually need other insects for food source, as do the spiders, which would be in the predator side. And you can see we have much greater populations of those as well. The one we didn't have that big of a population on were the herbivores, and those are the things you don't necessarily want a lot of in your vineyard. And so the conventional side had a lot more of those. And then on the last one, the sap sucking, which are the things that we don't want a lot of as well, we had a fair bit less as well. The thing about the sap sucking, again, and we keep talking about the problem insects, and one of the things I'm going to be getting to in the discussion about decision making is always this question of, are the things we are doing addressing symptoms, or are they addressing the cause? And so often we spend our time on symptoms. And a great indicator of symptoms is spray. If you're spraying anything, are you really addressing the problem, or are you just addressing the symptom? So one of the ways that we are looking at that is in part inspired by the work of John Kempf, and how do we increase the bricks in our vines? And I've mentioned this a bit. And so all of our fertility program is based on increasing the vines' overall health and having vines that are resistant to pests and disease. But that's been working pretty well. I think I did mention that we don't use sulfur, oil, or copper, which are the main tools in organic vineyards for controlling powdery mildew. And so we've eliminated all of those. And last year, the last 2 years in a row, we've only done one spray as a preventative, and we used a lupin extract. And I can't remember the name of that product, but it's non-harmful to insects. And 2 years ago, my neighbor called up, and all the vineyards around us are pretty big, hundreds of acres. A neighbor called up and he said, I want to know how you are doing this year, because this is the worst year of powdery mildew we've ever had. What are you spraying? I said, I haven't sprayed a thing. And he's like, he said it in Spanish. But he was basically blown away. And he said, this is not just the worst powdery mildew I've ever seen here on this vineyard. It's all around us. And so what are you doing? And I said, I don't know, but I better go check again and make sure. And we didn't, we always have there's always a little bit of residual powdery mildew around. It never becomes a problem. And so, again, I think it's part of that is the vine health, part of it is the trellis system, and part of it is just the ecosystem that we're in. So I'm going to go back to this idea of managing holistically and the decision-making part of this. And really what it's all about is having this vision of what you want. And I've talked to a number of people in this room who have some really amazing visions of what they're trying to achieve. And so when you look at, for instance, like at the work we've done, at the work that Tom's done here, we've all made a lot of mistakes in getting here. It's not like we had it all figured out from the start. And so it's all about trying out things, understanding what direction you're trying to go, and trying to keep bad decisions from lingering for a long time. and focus in on the decisions and the practices that you find that are working. So I want to go into a bit of the detail about how this works as a decision-making process. First, I'm going to start with a story. Um, when I first met Alan Savory, I heard him tell the story about working with a couple in what was then Rhodesia, it's now Zimbabwe, who had inherited some money. So they lived in Rhodesia, and they were hunting guides. And what they wanted to do was buy a ranch and have their own hunting ranch. And and again, they'd come into some inheritance. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to do this. So they asked Alan for some advice. What how can we get into this hunting venture, and how can you help us with this? And he said, I want you to go back to your house for the next couple of days and write down how your life is going to be when you achieve what you want through this hunting venture, and bring that back to me. Leave it with me for a couple of days, then I'm going to get back to you. So they did that, and after a few days, he got back to them, and he said, you guys need to come here, and I need to talk to you. And he set them down, and he said, what you described to me is the life of the hunting guide. If you take this money and buy and go in business, it's going to change your life dramatically. Because what you're describing for the quality of life that you want, the way that you want to live, it's that of a hunting guide. Take that money, put it in the bank, and use it when you're, because hunting guides don't make a lot of money, but use it when you're off to go do hunting trips someplace else. And that would, he said, to my mind, that would achieve this high quality of life for you. They ignored him. They bought a ranch, and within 5 years or so, they were bankrupt. And so what they did, because they did not want to do that work of marketing, of managing all that it takes aside from being the hunting guide in that work. And so how many times do we do things and we haven't really thought it through based on how we want our life to be? Because if you're not in it with your soul, you're not in it. You're just doing it because of some other type of reason. So really what decision making comes down to is understanding what is inside of you, what is really driving you, what can you not do. So that's what this is all about. And if you can harness that energy of your deepest desires, then you're on the right track. And that doesn't mean everything falls in place for you, but it does often mean that a lot does. And it does mean that you have the endurance to go through the obstacles that we all face, especially in agriculture, to be able to pull it off. I'm giving you guys a framework here, and what I want for this to be is an inspiration more than a guideline that you have to follow. Just keep in mind the principles of this, because I don't necessarily follow this, step by step, because in some ways it's not really a step by step thing, but we're going to break it down that way. So the first thing you want to do is define your whole, which is going to be the people who are making decisions. I mean, if you're one person on a farm, it's basically going to be you. The resource base, whatever that is, that could be your actual farm. It could be your business. It could be your community. But just looking at what your resource base is. In a lot of ways, we've created a resource base here. There's some people here with incredible ideas and passionate about what they're doing, and really the expert. There's no experts in here, but the collective wisdom in here is phenomenal. And I'd really encourage you all to take advantage of that and not just leave it all behind here. And then the last thing is money. What is the money that you have to work with? So when we talk about holistic management, one of the things that we always reference is the fact that, in a sense, there's a bunch of holes within holes. Nature is not parts. Parts is a human construct, and parts is how we create a lot of technology, but it is not how living organisms in the ecosystem work. So when you look at this, this is basically showing that idea of holes within holes. You have yourself, you have all the other things that you may be involved with, your family, your business, your enterprises, your friends. There's all of these things that make up your world that are basically holes within holes, but they're not parts. They're holes within themselves. And so that just keeping that in mind, that try and stay away from this reductionist view of life. These are the 7 testing questions that are encouraged in holistic management. But the idea behind this is these are not necessarily the only questions you're going to ask. These are just particular questions that through Savory's work and his work with others, they've come up with. These often get neglected, and you just want to make sure that you have included these in your decision making. And some of the big ones that I look at here are weak link. And oftentimes weak link is associated with like, what is the weak link in the issue that you're dealing with? And in agriculture, oftentimes it's problem insects, plants, animals. And we might say, okay, if this is a problem, is it a problem or is it a symptom? So that goes to another one. And these all kind of, again, like the circles within circles, these kind of tie off of each other. But is the problem that we're dealing with actually a symptom, or is it the problem? And are we addressing, when we address that, when we come up with ideas of how to address that, are we addressing the symptom, or are we addressing the problem? And oftentimes we're addressing the symptom. For instance, this a good example of this would be, we're talking about multiple insect pests out here, and when you spray those, are you addressing the problem or the symptom of the problem? Oftentimes it's the symptom. We're not addressing the actual problem. What we're doing is we're killing off what we see, but we're treating it as a part. And that all we got to do is get rid of that part and everything's going to be fine. But we haven't addressed the cause of the problem. And so we always need to be asking ourselves, what if we're doing an action here, are we addressing cause or effect? Are we addressing symptom or problem? And so that's a powerful one, and that can be used in a number of scenarios. Then this other one, the one below that, weak link, is one that's used often, and that can be used in financial situations, that can be used in social situations, and that can be used in biological situations. And so that's another one that we're looking at. And we often talk about that in the way that you might envision a chain. And if a chain has a weak link, that is the point where it's going to break. And if you address that weak link first, then you're going to have the most strength in your chain. If you address the second weakest link first, then you're going to lift your chain. You're going to lose it, and you're basically not operating in order to make maximum potential of what you're working with. So again, these are just ways of imagining how you can think through a decision to come to a good answer. And the other thing is, this doesn't make decisions for you. It just helps you make decisions. And so you're constantly thinking about, how do I think through this particular issue that I'm dealing with to the best way possible, so whatever solution I come up with will have the best potential, which is another one of the testing questions, which is marginal reaction. And we have talked about that a bit. Basically, where do you get the biggest bang for your buck? Where do you get the most effectiveness from an action that you take, be it in the vineyard or in your life, in your business? How do you get the biggest return for the smallest investment? And so that's one that's to always keep in mind and apply in so many different areas of our lives. Gross profit analysis is, there's a whole section of holistic management which is based on financial planning. And the financial planning is based off of all of these questions, as well as really having clarity of what you're trying to achieve. And so the marginal reaction test is one that's used often to say, if I put money in a certain place and have various options, where's the option that's going to give the greatest return? And I mean, this is an easy one. Just if you're just looking at pure economics, if you're trying to increase your bank account and you've got three different banks and each is offering a different savings rate with various stipulations, you can kind of balance those out so that you get the best return and maybe use all three of those, but you put the most in one account, second most in another, and the least in the third one. So we're always looking at options like that when we're doing financial planning and holistic management, but just also in life in general. And this kind of is somewhat the gross profit analysis is basically kind of the economic version of marginal reaction. The fourth one here is where is the energy, money, a source that you're using coming from, and is that coming from the most sustainable way possible? We at Piscinas Ranch about 5 years ago, we had the opportunity from a tax incentive program to put in enough solar panels to cover all of our electricity use on the ranch. And so now when we are using power, that power is basically coming from solar energy. It's tied to the grid, but basically we're producing pretty much all of our power at the ranch now, which has also allowed us to get electric tractors. The funny thing is we're constantly trying to figure out what to do with them. We have two, and second one we got was basically we made $1,000 off of it, that are brand new, and made $1,000 off of that because of incentive programs. And now we're just it's great to take kids for rides on, but we just, as I was mentioned before, our use of tractors keeps going down and down. I had an intern last year, and before she left, I said, "So how did it go? What worked for you? What didn't?" And she said, "I thought I was going to learn how to drag a tractor." And she said, "And it's nothing against you guys because I realized you don't use tractors." And so I said, "Well, here, I'm going to get you on the electric and let you haul some stuff around for a while." So you can fulfill part of that. So again, that's these can seem somewhat basic because especially these were developed. A lot of these questions were developed probably 50 years ago, and we're paying a lot more attention to a lot of these now. Then this number 5, sustainability, asking if this action that we take is going to basically lead to this vision that we have for our future, and is it either going to lead towards that or away from that? And I think you can see that these questions can be used in all different aspects of your life. But and if you do a deeper dive into holistic management, you'll see that there's financial planning, the grazing planning aspect of holistic management. If anybody is grazing livestock in any type of environment, I definitely recommend that you look into that, because the grazing plan can be used as a crop plan as well. And so when we do a grazing plan, it involves the entire ranch, the crop ground, the vineyard. And so it's looking at basically everything except for the headquarters. And the headquarters are grazed by a separate flock of sheep that are called hospitality sheep. And they have their own role. One of the herders is here. So, but a grazing plan is an incredibly powerful tool for achieving the goals that you want through grazing. When you think of grazing animals as a tool to restore your ecosystem, to manage those carefully is just dramatically increases the effectiveness of them. And it forces you to pay attention to things like, for instance, if you start grazing at the same place every year, you are likely overgrazing, because you're starting, especially if you're starting at the same spot in a seasonal climate, you're going to be starting in the spring where those plants have not really, because they've been dormant for a while, are coming up and they're operating off root reserve. So it allows you to plan to not do things like that. And it's a very powerful tool. The last one then is what is called gut feel. And this is just kind of going back to the humanness of us all and saying, what do I really feel about this? And you could potentially, after going through testing, you could realize that there's some things that really, to all of these other questions, or a lot of these other questions line up, but you just don't feel good about it. And that might actually cause you to not go through with that action, and maybe you realize that was for a good reason because your gut instinct was true. On the homework assignment, I just wanted to bring this up. There's this thing that Peter Donovan put together on common questions and how to make those questions better. And I really like this. And this is really based on a lot of holistic management stuff. But if you all had access to this because it's on the internet, but I highly recommend that you read this little thing that he put together. And I like this. I guess it's like the fourth one down. Are we doing sustainable or regenerative practices? Common question. The better question is our soil covered? Do we have living moods for all of the growing season and diversity of plants and animals? So it's not what you call it, it's what you're doing. What are best management practices commonly associated with accomplishing X, which appealed to me? And as you then reframing that to what conditions will enable X to occur. So that goes back to managing for what we want more than for what we don't want. We do a lot of managing for what we don't want. And so if we manage more for what we want, it might take us a little bit longer to see results, but we're going to get the results that we're looking for rather than getting a quick fix and trying to do something immediately. That is back to addressing a symptom. Anyway, so that whole booklet he put together is a lot of great wisdom. Peter Donovan started out as a shepherd in Oregon. He ended up creating the Soil Carbon Coalition, and he drove around the whole country for years in a bus doing soil carbon testing. And the bus, on the back of the bus, it said soil carbon testing and piano tuning, because he had a piano in there, and he's basically a concert pianist level musician. But also a great thinker about all of this and kind of translating a lot of the work that Alan Savory did. And then I just want to share this with you again, inspired by a lot of holistic management and just trying to clarify what we're trying to do. We put together a list of principles that we were using or wanting to put in place at Piscinus Ranch. And these are going to read a lot like what we were just talking about, but this is also partly related to our context. It was kind of in order to have some type of context for those other ranchers that are working particularly in the agriculture. And some of the things, like the very bottom one, make maximum use of solar energy and minimum use of fossil fuels. That's something that we've done a good job, because I've mentioned some of the things that we've done regarding that. But just managing to imitate nature has had the biggest effect on that in reducing our use of fossil fuels, because our main tool in that is biodiversity, and the most obvious one that people see are the grazing lands, the livestock that achieve it. Now, number two, we have this design idea, and so that's again related to what we were doing in the vineyard, but it also encourages us to think about other aspects of what we're doing. How do we design? How do we put that human intention into what we're doing? And then number five, but kind of like that one, manage the croplands to match or exceed diversity and health of exemplary regional standards. I would say at this point, we're nowhere close to that. So that will be something that we can definitely, this is kind of calling out to us to
two will work on.
And this is the total nutrient digestion test. If whether you're farming or doing livestock, I highly recommend you do this on your land. We have gotten to the point where we do very little lab work for our soils, in part because we are doing the lab work with the plants. So our plants are telling us what's deficient, whereas labs are basically telling you what they think is deficient in your soils. A total nutrient digestion is just telling you everything that's in your soil, everything that they can test anyway. And so it's a pretty cheap test. I think this was $25 to do this, and I believe we used either Ward or Regen Ag Labs for this. And so what we did is we took these are what they were on the test. We took these amounts and we assumed 5 tons per acre yield on the vineyard, and we then backtracked and looked at how many nutrients it takes to replenish that 5 tons every year, and how many years worth of reserve would we have based on that if we were not returning any of those nutrients back. And so that gave us, first we calculated the number of pounds we have per acre based on that soil test. And this is down to, I think it says they're down to down to 70 centimeters, which is 2.3 feet. And then we looked at how many years supply that would be. And this is a pretty mechanistic way of looking at this, but it was just out of curiosity. The lowest thing that we had was nitrogen, 470 years worth. That's if we'd never replenished any of it in the top 2.5 feet of soil. We've got 1,000 years worth of phosphorus, 700 years of potassium, 11,000 years of calcium. We're dealing with calcium deficiencies in young vines. What is that telling us? It's telling us, well, we know now that we have calcium deficiency in the surface of our soil. We also know when you get down far enough, we have excess calcium. So, and this test barely got into that calcium level. And that almost 90,000 years of magnesium, 100,000 years of zinc, 3 million years worth of iron, and 27,000 years worth of copper. The thing this tells me is we can do so much better because we have basically a mineral-rich soil. And if we're seeing deficiencies, it's because we don't have our microbial community as good as it can be. We're in the right direction, but we still have a long ways to go. And we've got a great resource base. And this is considered poor soil. So if we're looking at it this way, then we realize that if we're adding nitrogen in almost any system, you're really missing the boat. But because nitrogen is free, nitrogen, there's 34 tons of it over every acre. So anyway, this is just a good way. It's kind of humbling, and it also shows you the resource that's underneath our feet. And this is just in chemistry. We're all looking at the soil, and I would suggest if you just want a fun little awareness of what you're standing on and what you're working with, to do a total nutrient digestion task. And again, this is one of those other things that helps you make better decisions, and it's also a good way to monitor what it is that you're, and going back to that holistic premise of understanding your ecosystem. This is just another tool in that realm. This is our picking crew, and so I've shown these slides of stuff, but this is us harvesting. Two of the people here. This is one of the winemakers. This is the other one here. This is the one that's a indigenous woman whose tribe sent her to Vietnamese school, and we're probably harvesting Mencia, and our partner is actually from Spain, so we're getting our first Mencia here, and this is before we got the electric truck. So just wanted to show you some of the faces that exist on the ranch. And the last slide is I want to show you what a really happy bird's nest look like. This is in one of our grapevines, and you can see there that it's lined with wool. So the birds that grow on the ranch are really pampered. I suspect that every bird nest within 5 miles of their ranch is lined with wool. By the way, when I was in New Zealand, last year I visited a ranch, and they were a mixed operation. They had sheep, cattle, and they farmed as well, and then they had vineyards. They took me. The first thing they did was take me to one of their vineyards, and they said, "This was our worst vineyard on the property. Always has been until last year." I said, "What happened?" They said, "Wool is worthless right now. We just took a wool shed, a shed full of wool that we couldn't sell. We just spread it out on the vineyard, and within 9 months, all of our fertility issues were gone." There's probably enough wool in the United States in the warehouses rotting right now to restore the Great Plains.